Before I introduce our illustrious third speaker, the chair would like to acknowledge the presence of two Palestinian ambassadors in our midst. Ambassador Hassasian with his delightful wife who supports him in all diplomatic functions and is the star of the community in London, and of course our everlasting and evergreen young Palestinian ambassador, roving now, Afif Safi. So the chair acknowledges both ambassadors. Thank you for coming to this function. Our third speaker is a true scholar. He is currently a senior research fellow in philosophy at Oxford University. He is a member of the philosophy faculty at Oxford, and he's a distinguished lecturer and fellow in history at the Parks Institute. He is an author of many books, and he's written on Zionism, anti-Semitism, Jewish identity. He is currently contributing essays on the subjects of several books, including Israel, Palestine and Terror, another book, Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and the Anti-American Century. Why do you choose such big words? It's difficult for me to read them now. I'm a crash course in English. And then he's currently teaching a tutorial and seminar course on Zionism at Oxford, and philosophy after Auschwitz. And he is the editor of a journal of Patterns of Prejudice and co-founder of the Independent Jewish Voice. Please give a big warm welcome to Professor Klug.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Although I have to say that I am somewhat intimidated by the people to my left who are so knowledgeable in politics and history and international law. I don't really have a head for facts, which is why I'm a philosopher. It is more than an honor, it is a pleasure to be here today, because we're here to celebrate the launch of a book that is the fruit of a great amount of work and scholarship on the part of Victor Kattan. Like the previous speakers, I too was absorbed as I read the book, so much so that as I was reading today, I suddenly realized that the clock was ticking and I hadn't prepared my comments for this evening. So be warned, this is a book which, as Michel said, is a page turner. Once you start reading it, you want to read more. And that in itself, I think, is testimony to the caliber of the writing. It's unusual to read a book which combines erudition and scholarship with readability. In preparing these comments, I knew that I wouldn't be able to address the larger argument of the book because I'm not a jurist, and I'm not in a position really to contribute to the discussion about international law, only in a position to learn, as I have done, from reading Victor's book. So I've tried to confine my remarks to those subjects, or that subject about which perhaps I have a little bit of something to say. And in this connection, the theme of my remarks is truth, facing the truth and telling the truth. Because in this connection, Victor's book sets an example. And it sets a particular kind of example. In order to explain what I mean by that, I'd like to briefly use two counter-examples as foils against which to set Victor's book. The first counter-example is this. Some of the attitudes that have been expressed towards Richard Goldstone, who is, as you know, the judge who led the United Nations fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict, and whose report was recently published. A report that included an indictment of actions taken by Hamas during the recent conflict earlier this year, but concentrated on Israel and on the actions taken by Israel, describing those actions as, and I quote, a deliberately disproportionate attack designed to punish, humiliate, and terrorize a civilian population. Now, for saying that, and for saying things like that, Judge Goldstone found himself described in a number of circles, both in Israel and also in the wider Jewish world, as self-hating. His report is not only anti-Israel but also anti-Semitic. and so on. This I'm using as my first counterexample. It's an example, I think, of people who just cannot accept certain facts that are unpalatable, difficult to take, fly in the face of their preconceptions, and so turn on the messenger. The second example, coming from a rather different place and a rather different angle, is the attitude of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president of Iran, to the Holocaust, which he consistently downplays. And most recently, as far as I'm aware, and I'm quoting now from a report by Reuters from September, 18th of September, he described the Holocaust this way: it is a lie based on an unprovable and mythical claim. Again, I use this as a counter-example, an example, that's to say, of someone who is in denial, who cannot accept a truth that is inconvenient. Now, against those two counter-examples, I wish to place Victor's book, which is a model, I think, of endeavoring to face reality in all its complexity, including those parts of it that don't necessarily suit the political commitment of the author. And Victor writes with a commitment, a political commitment, and so he should. But it doesn't blind him to the facts that he is studying, to which, if I may say, though not a jurist, I believe he does justice. There are two components to this, to describing his book as a kind of robust acknowledgement of reality. The first component is this: it is, as both the previous speakers have said, a monumental work of scholarship. And just at that level, I think, Victor, you deserve to be commended, and your book to be recognized and to be used. I'll come on to that in just a moment. Others can testify better than I can, because they're more qualified, to the quality of the scholarship on international law. But there's one person that I can add to the some of the people that Eugene quoted from, and that is a colleague of mine, Professor Mark Levine, who teaches history at the University of Southampton. And I mention him because he teaches a course specifically on the British Mandate, on the Mandate period in Palestine. And I notified, knowing that he teaches this course, I notified Professor Levine of Victor's book when it came out. And the next thing is, I get an email, which he copied me into, that he had sent to all the students who were about to take his course, saying, go to the October bookstore and get the new Victor Kattan book. The new Victor Kattan book. I wish to echo what Eugene said. I hope one day this will be the old Victor Kattan book, and that there will be other new Victor Kattan books, and I'm confident that that is the case. As it happens, I will be inheriting Mark's course in the spring, so I will be teaching a course on the Mandate period, and I will be using your book, Victor, on that course. But the second thing I mean when I describe his book as an example of seeking to tell the truth and to face the truth is this: not only is it a work of monumental scholarship, but it's scholarship in the service of understanding. And scholarship isn't always in the service of understanding. It's sometimes very dry and can kill your interest in a subject. Victor's does the opposite, and I believe broadens the mind of the reader, of any reader, whatever commitments they bring to the reading of his book. And here I'm going to introduce the topic or the subject about which I feel perhaps I have just a little bit of something to contribute, and that is anti-Semitism. In particular, I think Victor's book is remarkable for his ability to insert the whole question, vexed question, of anti-Semitism into the larger subject of the Arab-Israeli or Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And as I wrote to him after he kindly gave me the opportunity to look at the relevant sections of his manuscript, I believe you have done a superb job of placing this question of anti-Semitism in the larger context of events leading up to the establishment of the State of Israel. Far from downplaying anti-Semitism, let alone the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews, far from downplaying it, Victor is clear that that is pivotal